Urban Legend. A Willis Sanders Story. Willis Sanders pulled his RAV4 into the abandoned parking lot, stopped and cut the engine. The headlights faded away, leaving only the faint gray glow of the cloud-covered moon to illuminate their surroundings. Knee-high weeds encircled the cracked asphalt square. 20 yards away, a sparse tree line barred the way to their destination. "You're trying to tell me this is where my cousin is staying?" "I don't know that he lives here, but I'm sure he was here," said Zoe, "and he didn't look like he was going anywhere anytime soon. Man, I still can't believe I let my mama talk me into this. Lonzo ain't never been no good. Even if I find him, he ain't gonna want to go with me. Probably have to knock him out and carry him away." The former Navy SEAL, now a professional treasure hunter, had come home to Detroit to visit family. He hadn't been home 24 hours before his mother and his aunt had guilt-tripped him into finding his wayward cousin, who hadn't been home in several days. "So don't go." Zoe turned to face him, intensity flaring in her rheumy eyes. "I'm not kidding, Willis. It's a crazy-ass place. All them urban legends about this place have to come from somewhere." A spasm of coughs, wet and phlegmy, racked her chest. She opened the door and spat on the ground. "Urban legends come from superstitious people and folks with too much imagination." Willis, still weary from the drive up from Key West, Florida, rubbed his eyes and yawned. Zoe shook her head. "You better be on your toes if you're going in there." "Girl, I promise you I've seen more dangerous places than an abandoned mental hospital. Now tell me where you saw Lonzo." Zoe raised her eyebrows. "You're not leaving me here alone. I'd rather be with you in there." She pointed toward the trees. "Than out here by myself. I don't like being anywhere near this place." Willis heaved a heavy sigh. He and Zoe had been friends since junior high, and he knew from long experience there was no point in arguing with her. "All right, come on then." They picked their way through the overgrown landscape, careful not to step on the broken glass, old syringes, and occasional mounds of human waste. As the dark, hulking outlines of several buildings came into view, he spotted a faded sign, its paint peeling. Northville Psychiatric Hospital. "I think a couple of my exes probably spent a little time here." He cast a sideways glance at Zoe, whose expression didn't change. He'd noticed a dramatic difference in her since he'd picked her up an hour before. Zoe, even during the lowest times in her life, had always been upbeat and positive. Now she seemed sullen, preoccupied, even a little twitchy. Her cheeks were drawn, her full lips were tight, thin lines. "What can you tell me about this place?" he asked. "Northville Psychiatric. It started out all right. The doctors here were pioneers in art and music therapy. They took care of the patients. Then back in the 70s, the state cut back the budget for mental health care and things got bad. Overcrowded, understaffed. The hospital used heavy medication instead of intense therapy. Pretty soon they couldn't afford to hire good people, didn't always have beds for all the patients." Willis nodded, remembering the story. Investigative reporters in the early 80s discovered patients spending their days smoking and watching television, fighting with the staff and with one another. At night, many slept in the hallways. Assault, rape, and unexplained deaths were commonplace. Minority patients got the worst of it at the hands of prejudiced staff. He was surprised he'd forgotten such an ugly story. "They finally shut the place down about 15 years ago," Zoe said. "They say some of the residents never left." Ordinarily, Willis would have chuckled at this proclamation, but Zoe's serious expression and deadpan tone silenced him. What she was saying might be a pile of crap, but she believed it. "The city discourages people from coming here. They say it's for our safety, talk about asbestos and crumbling buildings." Zoe paused. "But the thing is, even though they're so concerned, the police never patrol here. If you come here, then post a pic or video on social media, they'll come after you, but they won't go in here, won't even drive onto the property." "So I won't find a parking ticket on my windshield when we get back?" Zoe shook her head. "And don't bother calling 911. They won't send anybody out here." She took a deep breath. "It started with rumors of strange noises, screams, moans. Then people started reporting ghost sightings. And recently, folks who have gone in here have come back all crazy in the head." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Or they don't come back at all." "That ain't exactly unusual for old places like this, especially places like this." Willis cocked his head. "So why'd you come out here?" "There are 20 buildings here. Not all of them are dangerous." Up ahead loomed a 9-story brick building. Moonlight gleamed off its rows of dirty windows. His eyes roved along the contours, taking in the sagging roof, broken glass, and down to the crumbling steps. The sight sent a chill down his spine. Generally speaking, he wasn't a big believer in urban legends, but he'd seen enough crazy stuff in his time to know improbable did not equal impossible. "Not that one," Zoe said. "We don't want to go in there." "Is that where the ghosts are?" "Don't be an ass. I don't care if you believe me or not. This place isn't right." "Come on, girl, I'm just asking." He reached out and took her hand. "It's not fair, you know," she said, looking up at him. "What's that?" "You're so dark you blend right in. I'm lighter than you. The ghosts will see me first." She forced a smile. Willis put his arm around her shoulders. "Don't worry, I got you. Which building is it?" Zoe pointed. "It's over that way." Zoe froze, pointed a trembling finger. "What is that?" Up ahead, an eerie glow turned the fog a faint flickering yellow. In its midst rose a dark figure. Willis pushed Zoe behind him. The figure grew in stature, elongated, growing impossibly thin. Willis relaxed. "Somebody's got a fire going up there. We're just seeing a shadow in the fog." Moving on silent feet, he crept up until he saw a man bundled up in several layers of ragged clothing, hunched over a tiny fire. He was roasting a rat on a stick. Seeing no need to disturb the urban camper, Willis held a finger to his lips to indicate Zoe should remain silent as they crept along outside the ring of light. "That was nasty," Zoe said when they were out of earshot. "I've eaten worse." He'd been in numerous survival situations that required him to eat whatever he could scavenge. He'd definitely preferred a barbecue, but not when rat was on the menu. Zoe stopped short and pressed her hand to her forehead. "What's up?" "Nothing." She squeezed her eyes tightly shut and slowly shook her head. "I've had a migraine for a couple of days, ever since... Never mind, let's hurry this up." "Fine by me," Willis said. "Are we close?" Zoe scanned the surrounding buildings. "I'm not sure." "What do you mean, weren't you just here?" "I was in a hurry to leave. Come on, I think it's this way." She took him by the hand and led him toward a low, single-story building. The door stood ajar, inky blackness beyond. Zoe was whispering to herself. "Yeah, I remember. It's down. Way down." The door was jammed, but Willis had no trouble forcing it. They stepped into a narrow corridor, the floor cracked and covered with debris. To the left, dirty windows permitted enough light to reveal a row of doors, all painted green along the right wall. The dank smell of stale water filled the space. "You got a flashlight?" Zoe asked. "Yeah, but we don't need it just yet. Which way do we go?" Zoe bit her lip and then strode down the corridor, trying each door. The third door opened on what had once been an office. Willis could make out the shape of a broken-down desk and a smashed computer monitor. Old waterlogged newspapers covered the floor. As his eyes took in the details of the small room, he spotted writing on the wall to his right. His night vision was good, though no match for his friends Maddock and Bones, but before he could read the words, a blinding light flared in front of him. "Forgot my phone had a flashlight on it," Zoe said. She raised the light and let out a tiny gasp as she read the words spray-painted on the wall in scarlet. "You won't make it out alive." She turned to Willis. "I think we should go." He shook his head. "Not until we find Lonzo or I decide he can't be found. Now turn that thing off before somebody sees." Zoe immediately snapped off the light, plunging them into darkness. As they stood, waiting for their eyes to adjust, Willis felt her give his hand a squeeze. "I'm not sure I can find the place again," Zoe said, voice trembling. "I'm sure Lonzo is long gone by now." Willis seized her by the shoulders. "Girl, I need you to stop messing around. Why'd you come here in the first place, and don't lie?" He felt her shoulder sag as the tension drained from her body. Slowly she sank to the floor and buried her face in her hands. "I was making a run for a dude named Lance." Her voice was muffled. "A run? Damn, Zoe, I thought you left all that behind." She lifted her chin and stared at him, her face just visible. "You don't know what it's like. You were born here, but you aren't from here, not anymore. Some of us got to do whatever we can to get by." "I hear you." Her words stung, but it was true. Whenever he had come back to visit his family, he didn't truly feel like he was home. Sometimes it felt like his life began in the Navy and his life before that was a faded dream. "Who is this Lance? He don't sound like he's from around here either." "White dude. He's new, but he's already big time. Well, he's getting there anyway. He pays good and he's the only one dealing plant." Willis scratched his head. "Weed? No, they just call it plant. It's different. Anyway, he's got people growing it here, but he needs locals to carry it, people who won't stand out. He got my name from Lonzo, who's been working for him, and the money was good." "Why can't his people deliver it? White folks ain't exactly unicorns." At his words, Zoe pressed her hand to her forehead. Realizing what she'd done, she pulled it away quickly. "Sorry, head's still hurting." She took a breath. "It wouldn't work for his people to deliver. I can't explain it." "All right, so you do know where we need to go?" "Yes, but I don't want to go back there. I can't." Willis sighed and sat down cross-legged in front of her. Despite his rising impatience, he tried to adopt a soothing manner. "Tell me everything you can. What do they have here? A greenhouse? A lab?" "They're growing stuff here, but I wouldn't call it a greenhouse." Zoe's voice took on a forbidding tone. "Is Lonzo caring like you, or is he involved in the growing?" "He's growing," Zoe snapped. Her face had gone ashen, her eyes wide. "Did you see the plants?" "It's one big plant. They grow it underground in a room full of red lights. There's a big dome up above it like they want to keep the water off. This whole complex was a marsh once, and water drips everywhere. Maybe the groundwater's too polluted. Anyway, they take this one part of the plant, and when they finish with it in the lab, it comes out as a fine reddish-brown powder. Almost looks like dried blood." "Do they snort it, mix it up in water and drink it?" "You can't drink it. Water makes it lose all its potency. They must have told me 10 times how important it was that I keep it dry." Willis ran a hand over his shaved scalp. "What does the drug do?" "I haven't tried it." Zoe didn't quite manage to meet Willis's eyes as she spoke. "But they say it makes you think you're lots of other people. You jump through flashes of their lives like flipping through the channels on a TV." Willis thought that sounded unsettling and not at all what one would want from a recreational drug. "What about Lonzo? You said he's helping with the growing. Is he safe? I mean, as safe as someone working with drug dealers can be? Do you think he's free to leave if he wants?" Zoe let out a pained moan and covered her face again. "I don't think he can leave, and even if you could get to him, there's nothing you could do about it." "He hasn't been gone too long. How could he already be in that deep?" Zoe gazed at the open window, tears streaming down her face. "It can happen fast." "I've got to at least check it out for myself. You don't have to come if you don't want to. You can hide here until I come back." "No, I need to go back." Willis quirked an eyebrow. "Just like that?" "I don't want to go, but it's important." She stood and headed for the doorway. "You get in through the steam tunnels, but a lot of them are collapsed. The way in is through the bowling alley. Come on." Willis was surprised to learn that among its many amenities, Northville had its own bowling alley. They crept through the dark, swampy campus, the air foul with the stagnant water, until they reached their destination. He knew immediately that something was wrong. "Voices," he whispered. "Somebody's inside. You think it's some of the dealer's people?" "I doubt it," Zoe said. "The plant and the lab are still a long way from here. Besides, they're discreet." Willis moved to a cracked window and peered inside. Someone had flung black fabric over it, but through a narrow gap on the edge he could see inside. Propane lanterns set at regular intervals shone white circles of light out onto the bowling lanes. The wood hadn't been waxed or tended to in many years, and it lacked the usual shine. To the left, at the head of the nearest lane, 3 men stood drinking beer, talking and laughing loudly. All were pasty white with shaved heads. They wore sleeveless shirts, revealing a variety of tattoos, swastikas, Confederate flags, skulls with the words skins inside them, and clenched white fists surrounded by laurels. "What power my ass?" Willis whispered. As he watched, one of the skinheads hefted a bowling ball and flung it carelessly down the lane. Willis followed its trajectory, and his eyes fell on what he hadn't seen before. A young black man, bound and gagged, sat where the pins should be. His ankles were secured wide apart, providing a painful target for a well-placed throw. As he watched, the ball struck the young man on the inner calf and rebounded over to the opposite leg. Willis couldn't hear the youth's angry cry, but he saw the way his eyes bulged, his neck strained as he twisted within his bonds. "Goddamn skinheads." He looked back at the laughing men. None of them appeared to be armed. "We gonna see about this." "Oh, you think so?" Willis turned to see a 4th skinhead standing a few paces away. He was holding Zoe tight against him, his left hand covering her mouth. In his right hand he held a pistol pressed against her temple. "You must be the hooker delivery service," the skinhead said. "She's a nice one, but I think she might be infected with something. Bitch is burning up." Still crouched by the window, Willis quickly assessed the situation. The man had his finger on the trigger. He was just far enough away that he would almost certainly get a shot off if Willis were to make a move. He needed to get closer. "Come on, man," he said, raising his hands. "We're just checking the place out. Ain't got no beef with you." The man grinned. "I got some beef for your girl here." He jerked her head around, leaned in, and planted a kiss on her lips. In doing so, he pulled the gun away from her head. That was all the opening Willis needed. He sprang forward, his fist connecting with the skinhead's jaw just to the left of the chin. As the man's knees wobbled, Willis tore the pistol from his grasp. The skinhead recovered surprisingly quickly. He wobbled back a few steps and drew a knife. "You don't have the guts, boy," he said, flashing a crooked yellow smile. "Not just anybody can point a gun at a man and pull the trigger, and even less can hit a moving target. You ever killed a man? I mean a real man, not one of your ghetto—" His words died in a ragged gurgle as Willis's first shot tore through his throat. The second bullet made him a eunuch. Willis pulled the trigger again, but the magazine was empty. "Two damn bullets? Broke-ass son of a bitch." Zoe pressed her fingers to her lips, her eyes wide. "Sorry you had to see that," Willis said, staring down at the dying man. "I've seen plenty of people killed before," she said. "I just can't believe how good you can shoot." "You think that's good? You ought to see my friend Maddock. Dude don't miss." Willis took a few seconds to wipe the pistol clean, then tuck it into his pocket. He had a plan. Inside the bowling alley, the 3 remaining skinheads were still drinking. Their captives had forgotten at the end of the lane. Willis watched them for a long time, trying to determine if they were armed. He saw no weapons, but he had to assume they at least had knives. Zoe had told him that the way down into the blocked steam tunnel was directly behind where the captive young man now sat. Even if that had not been the case, Willis wouldn't have left him behind except in the direst of circumstances. Besides, he seldom got a chance to put white supremacists in their place. His friend Bones hated rednecks. Willis hated skinheads. The plan was a risky one, but Zoe was willing. Her sudden determination to return to the place where plant was grown and manufactured, coupled with her rage at the man who'd nabbed her, fueled her determination. "Don't worry," she said to Willis, pulling up her shirt to reveal her flat belly and tying it off. "They won't know what hit 'em." "I'm counting on that." Willis brandished the length of pipe he'd found nearby. As if suddenly transformed, Zoe's eyes glazed over, her smile widened, and she ambled through the door. Willis peered through the doorway as Zoe meandered up to the surprised skinheads. "Hey," she said, "anybody got some?" She paused, rubbed her face, wobbled a little. "Got some." The largest skinhead, a burly fellow with a red mustache, cackled. "Looks like we got us a crack whore wanting a fix. Give me your girl, I'll fix you." He reached out, encircled her waist in his powerful arm, and pulled her onto his lap. "Can you hook me up?" Zoe slurred. "Course I can, if you're sweet to me." The man grinned at his friends. "Fellas, I think this whore is wearing entirely too many clothes. You want to help her out with that?" Grinning lasciviously, the 2 men stood and closed in on Zoe. That was when Willis sprang into action. He dashed forward, closing the gap in a split second, and cracked the nearest skinhead across the chin with a pipe. The man dropped like a sack of potatoes. The second fared no better, catching the pipe across his temple. And then something crashed into him, sending him stumbling backward and knocking the pipe from his hands. The biggest skinhead had lifted Zoe bodily and thrown her at Willis. That hadn't been part of the plan. Zoe had a knife and was supposed to stab the man as soon as Willis appeared. Now he saw the knife in the skinhead's hand. The big man was advancing toward him, his bearing that of someone who knew how to fight. Willis had disarmed plenty of men with knives in his time, but he was in a hurry and pissed off to boot. He snatched the nearest bowling ball and flung it at the skinhead's leg. It cracked the man across the kneecap, eliciting a howl of pain. But Willis had already flung another, this one striking the shin. The skinhead went down on one knee, and Willis snapped a roundhouse kick that caught him in the jaw. The big man fell hard on his side. He struggled to rise, but his arms and legs weren't quite ready to cooperate. He looked up, eyes wild with rage and fear, as Willis loomed over him, holding a bowling ball high over his head. "I bet this wasn't the first time you had big black balls flying at your face." As the skinhead slashed out with the knife, Willis brought the bowling ball down on the man's head with a sickening thud. Not wasting time, he collected the bowling balls he'd used as weapons, wiped them down with a greasy rag he found nearby, and rolled them to the end of one of the lanes farther along. Next, he pressed the pistol into the hand of one of the skinheads, careful not to get blood or his fingerprints on it, then tossed it on the ground nearby. Meanwhile, Zoe had freed the imprisoned young man, who stood rubbing his wrists and gazing at Willis in wonderment. "Man, that was some world-star hip-hop shit. Wish I had that on video." He saw the look in Willis's eyes and hurried on. "Just 'cause you kicked ass, you know? I ain't a snitch. You saved my life." "And you're nuts," Willis said. "You got a name?" "Trey." The young man glowered at the fallen skinheads. "I owe them something." Picking up Zoe's knife, which was lying near the man with the red mustache, he dispatched the other two skinheads, opening their throats with a clinical detachment. "There," he said, dropping the knife into a pool of blood. "Now we're even. We gonna get out of here?" Willis shook his head. "We got something to do." The young man looked skeptical. "Yo, sure? There's some crazy stuff going on around here. The ground shakes and I hear these moans coming out of the vents, like ghosts or something." "Ain't no ghosts," Willis said. "Just ass clowns." "I don't know. This place has always been bad news. I heard that the Indians wouldn't come nowhere near here. My grandma said they had a legend that this place stole their dreams, whatever that means. Anyhow, white folks come along and they didn't listen." "There's a surprise," Zoe said. Trey forced a crooked smile. "But thanks again, I'm out of here." He hurried away without giving his name. Willis watched him go, then turned to Zoe. "Lead the way." The steam tunnel was not remotely steamy. Inside, it was surprisingly hot and dry as they made the monotonous trek to the underground lab. He stole the occasional glance at Zoe. Her expression was strained, and she occasionally pressed her hand to her forehead and muttered about a headache. From up ahead came the strange sounds Trey had described, deep, anguished moans. As they drew closer, Willis felt a chill. He knew tunnels like this could cause strange reverberations, lending an unearthly touch to commonplace sounds. But these sounds were hardly common. "Sounds like somebody's in pain up there, a bunch of somebodies. What do they do in this lab? Are they testing the drug on people?" "I don't remember," Zoe said much too fast. Willis eyed her with rising apprehension. Something was very wrong about this whole situation, something that went beyond dealers putting a strange new drug on the street. Furthermore, he didn't believe Zoe was sick, at least not with any commonplace illness. Perhaps she'd tried this new drug, plant, and was suffering the side effects. A flickering light cast a sickly yellow light, giving Zoe a jaundiced look. As they passed beneath it, he noticed a lump at the center of her forehead. Had it been there before? "Did that skinhead punch you?" He reached out to touch her, and she swatted his hand away. "Don't touch me." She took a step back. "We're almost there. It's up around the corner." The way she said "it" told me she wasn't referring to the lab. Just then, a shrill scream split the air, the sound of a woman terrified out of her wits. "No! Please!" Willis hurried ahead, but Zoe grabbed him around the waist like a football player trying to make a tackle. "Girl, what are you doing? Somebody's in trouble up there." "She's already dead." Tears streamed down Zoe's face. "It's all wrong in there. I saw stuff nobody should ever see." "You wanted to come back?" "I think I have to." She began to tremble. "I ate some of the plant." Her voice was a sharp hiss. "Ate it? Why?" "I wanted to try it, but I couldn't take any of the powder. They're real particular about it. Weigh it when you give it to you, and then again when you deliver it." She hesitated. "There's these parts that grow at the tips of the plant, like red fingers. That's the part they turned into powder. There was a bunch of it they just harvested. It was lying there, and I just broke off a little bit of it." Willis couldn't believe she'd been so stupid. "You said you did this just for the money." "I was stupid, I know, but I saw—" She looked down, unable to meet his eye. "What?" "I saw into Lonzo's memories, for real." Willis rolled his eyes. "The drug made you think that." Zoe gave her head a vigorous shake, her tight black curls falling across her eyes. "I saw you both. You were just out of school. You robbed an old man right out on the street, and then you punched him, knocked him out cold." Willis swayed on the spot. It was one of his most shameful memories, the incident that convinced him to change his life by joining the Navy. "Lonzo told you about that," he said hoarsely. "I saw it." "I don't have time for this. Just stay here." He turned and strode along the tunnel toward the place from which the screams had come seconds before. A red glow filled the passageway, and the heat grew intense. He turned the corner and stopped short. He stood before a heavy door with a small security window. Inside lay a vision from a nightmare. The plant was a monstrosity, alien in appearance. It stood at least 20 feet tall and 40 or more feet across. A plexiglass dome hung suspended from the ceiling, sheltering it from the groundwater that dripped down from countless cracks. The plant's dark green stem was so thick that Willis could not have wrapped his arms around it. It flowered at the top in a series of shovel-shaped petals so black they seemed to swallow the red lights. Black spikes studded its length. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Growing out from the stem were long vines covering in gray, worm-like tendrils, some ending in the red tips that Zoe had described, others with mouths like a Venus flytrap. And they were moving. Another scream rang out, harsh and strident, and Willis saw a burly man shove a young woman toward the twisting vines. She tried to run, but one of the mouths clamped down on her head and pulled her into the mass of writhing green. She cried out as two of the red spikes wormed into her ears. Eyes still on the woman, Willis tried the door and found it locked. He stepped back and threw his shoulder into the door once, twice, 3 times. The door was solid, but Willis was a powerfully built man, and he kept in shape through a rigorous exercise regimen and lots of scuba diving. The 4th try and the door gave way. He stumbled inside, his eyes taking it all in. The floor was a white latticework of what he quickly recognized as layer upon layer of bones, human and animals of all kind. How long had this plant been down here, feeding? He circled a massive thing, careful not to come within reach of its tentacles. Now he saw the bodies. Some were in an advanced state of decay, others still alive, though in what appeared to be a comatose state. Each victim was held in place by one of the horrible jaw-like appendages, which appeared to have melded with the flesh, making the person a part of the plant. Other vines grew from their ears. "It's feeding on them," he muttered. The pieces began to fall into place. This plant absorbed its victims, consumed them. That was why it didn't need water. And then he spotted Lonzo. His cousin lay within the grasp of the plant. His eyes were milky white, his mouth hung open. Like the other victims, the plant had melded with his skull, and vines had penetrated his ears. And then he remembered his conversation with Zoe. "Is Lonzo caring like you, or is he involved in the growing?" "He's growing." He hadn't realized how literal Zoe's words were. And then he thought about the effect of the drug. Was it possible that the plant somehow absorbed its victims' memories? After all, what were memories but electrical currents and chemical reactions? Maybe Zoe really had gotten a brief window into Lonzo's memories. And then he remembered something else she had said. "I'm sure Lonzo is long gone by now." "Oh man, Lonzo," Willis groaned. "Ain't a damn thing I can do for you." Nor could he help anyone else. The young woman he'd seen being fed to the plant was already catatonic, though still letting out intermittent shrieks and cries. "This is where the urban legend came from. Must have been a cavern down here where this thing lived, and people heard its victims crying out." Something moved at the corner of his vision. Zoe had followed him. In his utter shock at seeing the horrifying spectacle, he'd forgotten his friend. Now she moved, trance-like, toward the flailing vines. The plant seemed to register her presence. 3 of the appendages turned in her direction and reached out for her. "Zoe, what the hell you doing?" He dashed toward her, seized her by the arm, and yanked her back just as a pair of green jaws snapped shut, inches from her face. "Let me go. I have to go to it." "You crazy?" "Yes, and I'm not going to get better." She began to shake. "Look at my head. It's inside me." The lump on her forehead had grown and was moving, as if something inside struggled to get out. And then a red spike burst forth in a spray of blood. The plant was growing out of Zoe's head. Instinctively, Willis jumped back, and in doing so released his grip on her arm. Zoe didn't hesitate. She turned and ran into the arms of the horrifying thing that waited to consume her. "Zoe!" Nausea swept over him as he watched the plant embrace her in its sinister coils. He took a step toward her, and then danced back from its searching grasp. He knew she was gone, and so was Lonzo, but he had to do something about this monstrosity. He made his way to the door leading to the lab. Inside, a burly man, pistol on his hip, stood with his back to Willis. Beyond him, 2 men wearing goggles, masks, and gloves were hard at work. All around them were the trappings of a drug lab. He recognized various acids and chemicals. Based on what he saw, he had a feeling they were also cooking meth here, or had done so in the recent past. Heart racing, he tried the door. It was unlocked. Slowly, silently, he turned the handle and opened the door. He was just about to squeeze through when the hinges let out a loud squeak. The armed man turned toward him, but much too slowly. Willis drove a sharp punch into the man's Adam's apple and then followed with a left hook to the jaw that turned his legs to water. The masked men froze, eyes wide behind their goggles. One of them raised his hands above his head and the other followed suit. "If you're a cop, we'll cooperate," one said. "And if you're not, just take what you want. We won't try to stop you." "I ain't no cop." Willis knelt and freed the fallen man's pistol from its holster. He confirmed the safety was off and a round was in the chamber. "And the only thing I want is for this mess to end." Horrible images flashed through his mind, visions of Lonzo, Zoe, and all the other victims being consumed by the plant. Rage burning inside him, he raised the pistol and aimed it at the chest of the nearest man. "What the hell is that thing?" "Can't say for sure. Lance thinks it's alien. Said there was a legend of a meteor landing in the marsh hundreds of years ago. A local Indian tribe took it down into this cavern, treated it like it was sacred. That didn't work out so well for them." "How do I kill it?" The man shrugged. "We're chemists, not botanists." He glanced down at a graduated cylinder filled with red powder. "Look, dude, there's plenty of this to go around. This right here is worth thousands. Just take it and we'll forget we ever met one another." He picked up the glass container and, with a sudden flick of his wrist, flung it in Willis's direction. Willis had expected the man to pull something. He dodged a few steps to the side and squeezed off 2 shots, taking one chemist in the heart and the other in the forehead. The guard whom Willis had knocked out earlier began to cough as the cloud of fine powder settled around him. Willis decided not to waste a bullet on him just yet. He had to deal with the plant, and he had an idea how. Moving out of the lab, he looked up at the plexiglass dome. Zoe had said it was essential that the drug not get wet, and clearly the plant itself was being shielded from the water. He took aim and fired. The impact smashed a jagged hole in the dome, and water began to drizzle down onto the plant. Where it struck, the plant began to violently flail about. "You don't like that, do you?" He continued to fire at the dome until he'd emptied the magazine. Water now dripped down from 6 gaping holes in the protective cover. The entire plant writhed, and its human victims, those who still had a voice, let out high-pitched screams. But was it enough? The plant seemed to be angry, but still very much alive. Maybe immersion in water would do the trick, but that wasn't an option. There had to be another way. The lab. He ran back inside and began gathering up the ingredients he would need. He made several trips, proceeding cautiously as he cooked up the deadly cocktail. Hypophosphorus acid, lithium metal, acetone, anything he could find. Some he mixed, others he sat side by side in strategic locations all around the cavern. Then came the flammables until he had created a trail leading to the exit door. Casting one last regretful look at Zoe and Lonzo, he lit the fire and ran. Behind him he heard a whoosh and a roar. Golden light filled the tunnel, and then a deafening explosion hurled him off his feet. He hit the ground face first, smashing his nose and forcing the air from his lungs. Chunks of concrete fell all around him. The tunnel was coming down. He had to get out of there. Forcing himself to his feet, he half ran, half reeled to the pile of rubble that provided egress into the bowling alley. He began to climb. Another tremor shook the passageway, shifting the loose debris beneath his feet. He slid back to the floor, a falling chunk of ceiling just missing him. "Where's my crew when I need them?" he rasped. He began to climb again, rocks shifting beneath his feet, dust choking his lungs. He climbed up, slid down, and climbed again. His strength waned. The way out seemed to remain just out of his reach. "Almost there," he gasped. He reached for the opening, but another tremor sent him sliding back. And then someone caught his outstretched hand in a firm grip. "I can't pull you out," a familiar voice said. "You got to help me." Unable to believe his luck, Willis threw the last of his energy into the effort. Grunting from the effort, he climbed free of the collapsing tunnel and found himself face to face with Trey. "Now we're even," Trey said. "Thanks, now we gotta get out of here," Willis replied, and they began to run. Ground trembling beneath their feet, they dashed out of the bowling alley and into the dank night air. They didn't stop running until they reached his car. "What the hell happened down there?" Trey asked. Willis grimaced. "One big-ass meth lab explosion." "A meth lab? You mean there wasn't anything else? No aliens? No ghosts?" "Nah, man," Willis said. "That was all just an urban legend.